welcome. We've got a bonus episode for you. A long time ago, we recorded this episode on Doom, but unfortunately, I moved away from home and I brought 0 copies of this episode with me. So it took a while before I would go back and fetch this episode. It was meant to be episode 9. We've progressed a little bit beyond that. Yeah, here's episode 9B. We hope you enjoy it and stick around because there'll be more fun like this in the future. Thank you. Enjoy the episode.
Hello, and welcome to the next episode of That Encyclopedia podcast, and the first episode that has been slightly reformatted in something of a channel experiment, I guess you could say. And to celebrate this step in a new direction, I want to introduce this episode a little bit differently. Do you mind if I throw something at you and you can give me your reaction?
Go on.
Okay, I want you to, in your head, combine 3 things. The tabletop RPG Dungeons & Dragons, the science fiction action film Aliens, 1986, written and directed by James Cameron, and Evil Dead 2, the 1987 American comedy horror film directed by Sam Raimi. Merge these things together in your head and cast yourself back to the late 1980s, early 1990s. What do you think you get?
Is this a trick question? I'm of course briefed on the topic of today's episode. But that sounds
Yes.
an awful lot like an awesome marine rampage, shoot 'em up FPS, kill all the demons from hell type game.
How did you know? Psychic. Correct. We are talking about the 1993 first-person shooter Doom, stylized in all caps, which means I get to pronounce it as Doom in a more upbeat way. A game so old that it precedes its own genre term. It defined the first-person shooter before first-person shooters were even a thing. It pioneered graphics. It pioneered the use of mods. It pioneered students breaking university web servers. It pioneered moral panics around video games generally and satanic imagery specifically within the United States. It even, in some ways, pioneered Windows 95, which is a little side story we might get to. But to conclude, it pioneered many, many, many things in the age of the flourishing internet in the 1990s. How do you feel about Doom?
Well, I've never played any of the Doom titles, but I'm very aware of them, and I mean, that goes to show they are quite famous in the video game space. What I was finding interesting just then, even as you were saying it again, I have read it, but the notion that Doom is in part inspired by the tabletop game Dungeons and Dragons, because that struck me as odd until I realised again what you said about it being genre defining. So it seems weird to associate it with Dungeons and Dragons, because to me it doesn't feel like there's much in common with Dungeons and Dragons. But maybe there is, because before Doom, I mean, what were video games like back then? Probably much less close to like the level of RPG elements, the level of story focus, the kinds of combat that we have in games today. So I get how that could be a thing, yeah. No, but it is.
That's interesting, but actually, I would suggest that interpretation might be a bit anachronistic. I think it might be the other way around. I think it's more that back in the early editions of Dungeons and Dragons, the gameplay was much closer to a first-person shooter around a table than the RPG system it is today. Now, it's always been an RPG, of course, but first, second editions, advanced editions were very straightforward in their storylines, and the emphasis was entirely on combat. Go to this room, clear this room, go to the next room, like pen and paper RPG books that you can rent from libraries and so on. So I think it's actually Dungeons and Dragons that's strayed away from its first-person shooter-like roots, and Doom has been more loyal.
That makes sense. The other thing that, well, I guess I could do a little bit of justice in explaining the setting, and then maybe we can talk a little bit more about the gameplay, so that this all sort of fits in place to anyone that, unlike us, has not read all about Doom or played Doom.
Mm-hmm.
So Doom is a game divided into sort of 3 or 4 episodes, depending on the version of the game. And these episodes, they're not particularly plot heavy, but they are somewhat distinctive, and they are composed of a number of levels in which, you essentially go through a number of rooms, shooting and stabbing stuff until you get to the end. The setting is, well, you are playing as an unnamed Marine, who the internet like to know as Doom Marine or Doom Guy, and he's been posted to a dead-end assignment on Mars after assaulting a superior officer who ordered his unit to fire on civilians. Now, that seems like a trope that I'm familiar with, but we can go back to that. The Union Aerospace Corporation, which operates radioactive waste facilities there, allows the military to conduct secret teleportation experiments that go terribly wrong. A base on Phobos urgently requests military support, and the Marine joins a combat force to secure it. So he goes there, and he waits at the perimeter, but the entire assault team that was sent there has been wiped out. So with no way off the moon, armed with only a pistol, he enters the base intent on revenge. And there you have it. Doom Marine is ready to go kill whatever came out of this teleportation experiment that went wrong.
I have always wondered, because I've never played Doom myself, but I've heard a summary of this story before, and Phobos and Deimos, they're the 2 largest moons, like satellites orbiting Mars, right? But Doom Guy is posted to Mars proper, to Mars itself, and then is redeployed to Phobos at the beginning of the game, and then later finds his way to Deimos at the second episode. But if the corporation conducting these experiments were at the radioactive waste facilities are on Mars proper, then why do Phobos and Deimos come under attack? Are they all owned by the Union Aerospace Corporation? Do we know?
Wait, what do you mean by under attack? So they are, from what I understand, they're under attack from the stuff that came out of the teleportation experiments. So the Union Aerospace Corporation, I believe, controls Mars and its moons, and I suppose they weren't expecting to need a massive defense force on one of their military science laboratories, and so they dumped him there. They didn't have much in terms of defense, then aliens came and killed everyone.
Well, that's entirely the researchers' fault. They should have considered that possibility in their risk assessment before conducting the experiments.
I have a question for you.
Sure.
Have you ever played the game Half-Life or Half-Life 2 or any of the Half-Life games?
I haven't, no.
See, I'm now starting to get the sense that Half-Life, which is pretty well known and fairly definitive game in its own right. It's a first-person shooter released by the company Valve, which also runs the biggest online PC games platform, Steam. But they made a first-person shooter series called Half-Life, and the plot of Half-Life also involves a company conducting experiments with teleportation which go wrong and lead to aliens coming to invade and subject Earth. And there seems to be some similarities to this, and I'm pretty sure Half-Life came after, so I wouldn't be surprised if the plot is inspired by the plot of Doom.
Well, a whole generation of video game programmers and computer graphic designers and anyone who has anything to do with video game development grew up playing Doom or making mods for Doom or hearing about it. And Half-Life is a Valve game, isn't it? So that's Mr. Gabe Newell, who in the article is cited as someone who's gone on record expressing their admiration of Doom. Gabe Newell said that id, or ID, the development company, didn't even distribute through retail and distributed through bulletin boards and other pre-internet mechanisms. To me, that is, to Gabe Newell, that was a lightning bolt. Microsoft was hiring 500 people sales teams around this entire company, and this entire company was 12 people, yet it had created the most widely distributed software in the world. There was a sea change coming. So perhaps this game is actually at least partially responsible, not only for inspiring storylines from Valve, but almost for the success of Valve itself. Gabe was so impressed by how a single video game was distributed through irregular channels that he thought, ooh, there's a business idea in this, and founded Steam. And this is how Steam came to be. There's no evidence of that, or at least I haven't read around it, but it's a nice little connection there.
Yeah, well, even before the creation of Steam itself, I've just went onto the Half-Life video game page, and in the development section, the second paragraph begins with Half-Life was inspired by FPS games like Doom, and it lists a couple more things that inspired it. But the second sentence is also, according to the designer Harry Teasley, Doom was a major influence, and the team wanted Half-Life to scare you like Doom did. So it does sound like there is a connection there, which I find interesting. Not that we're going to spend any more time than necessary talking about Half-Life, because we've got plenty to talk about already.
And it's a game that has made a triumphant return reasonably recently as well, hasn't it? With Doom revamped. Its software is still the same company, and the game is also called Doom. So Doom brackets 2016, where Doom Guy was renamed to Doom Slayer for some reason, and then 2 years ago it made Doom Eternal, a kind of PS4, Xbox One, Windows console game. So it's still going. The sequels and reboots will maybe never stop.
Yeah. Well, why would you give up on a franchise you can keep earning money from? It's the modern world.
Well, speaking of the modern world, how about a question for you, right? When you consider everything that was promoted by this game, so by that I mean not only the game itself, but what you could do within or around the game. You know, the first episode, the first kind of section was released for free to entice people to play it like a little demo. The whole coding was premised on the desire by the developers to make the game mod friendly. So similar to games that Bethesda might make, it's made to be extremely moddable. It's made to be compatible with different software engines, and what you see is what you get. Do you think this is kind of I don't know? Is it a gold standard not just in its genre, but as a video game generally on an almost meta level? Do you think?
I think it certainly sounds a bit like that to me. Yeah, from a consumer standpoint, it's nice to be able to like dip your toes in, which you can do with a demo. I like playing demos. Yeah, pretty good. And also, yeah, making it easy for a community to make modifications to a game, I think is really good. It helps grow the community, and honestly, I don't think Skyrim would have been going as long as it has been by Bethesda if they hadn't kept that sort of easy to mod functionality, which is why I wonder if there's some element of that contributing to the very, very slow development of the next game. Because if you want to make a game that is both next gen but also easy to mod, I can imagine that being a little bit challenging, right? Because the more complex your game and its systems are, the less easy it is for a single lone programmer to make a little spin-off modification that works. You'd need to make a very, very strong like mod development kit like they had for Skyrim. I like to be able to just purchase my entire game in one go and maybe have a little free bit. And I like the way that hype was built. It sounds like it would have been very fun to get into Doom back when it was released. In fact, reading the entire concept design, audio and mods section really made me feel like I wanted to play it, but then I sort of remembered that it doesn't actually sound like the kind of game I enjoy. I like everything that's gone into it.
Should we talk a little bit about the gameplay itself, the meat and potatoes of Doom, when you actually load it up? What happens?
Yeah, what is Doom? Why is it impressive?
Well, it is the, as I mentioned, genre-defining first-person shooter. So this means you look literally out of the eyes of your character, the unnamed but normally kind of colloquially called Doom Guy, and you make your way through various military installations and later the pits of hell, of course, which is the logical next step, fighting hordes of demons, some in their own monstrous bodies, some possessing or otherwise resurrecting the human bodies of your fallen comrades and science teams and security guards and so forth, and they're all trying to kill you. So the logical conclusion is that you have to kill them first, and you can do this in a number of ways. You have basic military weapons, you have your pistol, your shotgun, and so forth, but you also have more creative and distinctly violent approaches to handling it, such as a chainsaw. And while you are wielding weapons, you can also find additional power-ups, probably most notably for armor, so that you can protect yourself against the hostile environments you'll be running around. And it's you'd now call this style with a the bottom of the screen taken up by kind of a UI and utility bar showing health, armor, ammunition, a perspective of your character's face. You'd call it a Doom clone style game, so it's almost we have to talk about it recursively because it's the model example. but you'll be running around these complex levels and maps that the game designers actually had a bit of a falling out over when they were first making it. The lead designer was a man called is a man called Tom Hall, but he had a bit of a falling out with the rest of the team because he felt his design ideas were being rejected, and he had very little influence, he felt, over the development design process, and so ultimately was fired by the rest of the team. So the game isn't without its controversies, both internal and external, its developmental bumps, but the end result is almost universally agreed to be a critically acclaimed success.
Well, on the mention of controversies, I could go over a couple of the external controversies, as you would say. Doom was notorious for containing graphic violence, but also satanic imagery, because the concept behind what's happening is these aliens initially that came through the teleportation experiment. The plan of the game designer, who would then leave later, wanted this to be a bit more played into, developing some sort of plot for the game where they're aliens, but each subsequent episode it becomes clearer that what you're dealing with is demons from hell, and the setting becomes more of a hellscape. So that meant that Doom was a game that contained graphic violence and satanic imagery. So this was controversial for a number of groups, and it was rated M for mature. Yahoo Games listed it as one of the top 10 most controversial games of all time. It was criticised by religious organisations, and it was dubbed a mass murder simulator by a critic and Killology Research Group founder David Grossman. What is the Killology Research Group? I don't know.
It sounds to me like some sort of think tank. It is hyperlinked, but it just links to the man's page.
Right. So, David Grossman is an American author and trainer who conducts seminars on the psychology of lethal force. So he's a retired lieutenant colonel as well. Okay, interesting. Yeah. So Doom was one of the early games to prompt fears that virtual reality technology could be used to simulate extremely realistic killing, and that this might then pertain to lead to violence in the real world. Now that was again pressed further by the controversy that came from the Columbine High School massacre in 1999, as it was found that the two that committed the massacre were avid Doom players, and whilst planning for the massacre, Eric Harris, one of the shooters, had written in his journal that the killing would be like playing Doom, and he also made reference to Duke Nukem, another 3D first-person shooter.
It's also due to say that one of the Columbine shooters, Eric Harris, was a modder, not only a player, and he created a large mod for the game called Tyr, which in his diary he described as his life's work. and the I think they're called the Harris levels, actually, is the name given to his collection of mods that kind of float around the internet. I don't know if they've been lost, if you can find them somewhere, but it's sort of a macabre, almost like collector's item for avid true crime fans. You know, even if you don't play Doom, this is the file that contains the levels designed by two mass killers. There was some belief that one of the Harris levels was designed to be the layout of the school, Columbine, and so the killers would practice for their massacre by playing through Doom on these levels, but there's no actual evidence of that, so that takes it one step away from reality. And this is an area of security studies that I research and work in, and so this controversy is particularly interesting to me. But I think it's important to note that for this particular incident, Doom was one of many counter-cultural pursuits that these individuals followed, and so it's part of a bigger picture. And so Doom is not kind of like this idol that's the sole cause of the controversy. It's just part of a much wider controversy. So it occupies almost two controversies: a controversy about games and a controversy about this tragedy in 1999. So just another reason it will go down in history.
There's a little extra controversy that was mentioned, and it pertains to the fact that id Software had actually already released what is still a fairly famous first-person shooter, which they had released in 1992, so 1 year before Doom, which is an FPS which involves killing Nazis as opposed to demons from hell. And because of that, they had put a little structure in one of the levels in Doom, and that structure is shaped like a swastika as a homage to Wolfenstein 3D. But they removed that swastika in later versions of the game, and this was apparently done out of respect from a complaint from a military veteran. So out of respect, they removed that.
That
decent idea.
Yes. Yeah, that to me just sounds like a bit of an oversight on the developers' part. A little bit of tunnel vision. Understandable. Probably for the best that they removed that pretty quickly. Maybe to finish up, we have about I think 5 minutes left or so. And this is the reformat, by the way. We're cutting the episode times a little bit, but there's a reason for that you will see very shortly. But perhaps we should finish by talking a little bit about its legacy, not for politics or not game development in a meta sense, but just gaming generally, for its genre, the now very popular first-person shooter FPS genre of gaming. Do you have a favourite FPS or any particular highlights that you would recommend to people?
Yeah, I've never really been that much into first-person shooters, and what's interesting nowadays is I feel like the vast majority of first-person shooters are multiplayer-centered games. And we're looking back now at a game that did eventually incorporate some multiplayer, and it sort of had the first deathmatch mode in a game, but nowadays they're very, very much multiplayer-dominated, which is not really my thing. But what I have enjoyed playing is Half-Life 2 from the Half-Life series that I mentioned earlier. I like Half-Life 2 because it is not afraid of leaning more into a little bit of plot some interesting world building that's going on, and I did not realise until reading this article how much of it seems to be inspired by Doom. So that just makes me like Doom more. But yeah, I enjoyed Half-Life 2. If you were to play it, it might feel a little bit dated, but one of the things about that game is it was also seen as fairly cutting edge in terms of what they did with technology. For example, they had a door that moves on its hinges, and that door had a window with textured glass which you could see through that distorted what was on the other side, and that actually was quite a skillful creation in a video game at that time. And it's also famous for the body language of the non-player characters in certain sections of the game. For example, in the house where there are a couple of refugees, one refugee is comforting another, and it displays some like quite human interactions that are not that common to early video games, especially first-person shooters. So it's quite an interesting one. Yeah. How about yourself?
Well, for me, I'm a little bit more basic, I guess. I am a Halo fan. I always have been. I really enjoy Halo. The first Halo Combat Evolved, was by itself a genre-defining first-person shooter, and is widely credited with putting the Xbox as a console on the map, at least for a little bit. But the design of Halo, I think it has lots of similarities to Doom as well, in its own way. Especially, oddly actually, especially the later installments where you start having armor power-ups. You have your shield function in Halo is sort of like the armor function in Doom, just a little bit modified. Varied weapons, clearing corridors and rooms step by step. You're a big military guy in a suit. I think there's plenty of parallels. But yes, I'm a Halo fan myself.
Yeah, well, I can see even the similarity in terms of having a deliberately obscure main character, Marine, who we don't know much about other than he has a knack for fighting.
Yes. Unlike the Marines in Halo, who don't have a knack for fighting at all.
Okay,
Lovely.
Well, we will wrap that up there for today. I hope you have enjoyed our episode on Doom, and I hope you stick around and listen to what we have planned for the future. Take care.